It's Friday, the 13th of January, 2023.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Pod News Weekly Review with James Cridland and Sam Sethi.
I'm James Cridland, the editor of Pod News.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the host of Sam Talks Technology.
In the chapters today, Apple Delegated Delivery is delivered. A look back at a year of Google podcasts, and Fountain gets a big update. This podcast is sponsored and hosted by Buzzsprout. Last week, 3,055 people started a podcast with Buzzsprout, which is up week on week, by the way. They offer podcast hosting made easy with powerful tools and remarkable customer support. I noticed that they've been doing some very smart new emails recently, and there's something new coming later this month.
From your daily newsletter, the Pod News Weekly Review.
But first, James, let's have a look at what's been going on. Yeah, Apple finally delivered delegated delivery. Tell me, what is delegated delivery then?
It's a beautiful word, isn't it? Delegated delivery. I mean, who knows? I did hear that they weren't going to be calling it that, so I'm not quite sure why they've ended up calling it. But anyway, it's called Delegated Delivery, open brackets, beta, close brackets. And what it allows you to do is if you are publishing on Apple Podcast subscription, you're publishing a paid version of your show, then you can just press the button directly on the podcast host that you currently use, and it will automatically get onto Apple's platform. And that those people at the moment are Blueberry, Libsyn, Triton Digital's Omni Studio, and RSS.com. I actually used Omni Studio's solution for a month or so in November when they were testing it, and that seemed to work very, very well. Buzzsprout will follow alongside Acast and Art19, but weirdly not Megaphone. Why do you think that might be, Sam?
Oh, I don't know. Begins with S. Let me just take a wild guess.
Might have something to do with the fact that they're owned by Spotify, one would have thought. If you're not with one of those podcast hosts, then of course you can still upload your audio directly to Apple Podcasts Connect, which is what I do, because as of the end of last year, we went ad-free on the Apple Podcasts system. And if you want to get this show as well as the Daily Show ad-free, so this show without any of the dynamic ads, and the Pod News Daily without any ads at all, then apple.co/podnews is the place to go.
Now, James, I understand this is quite a big thing for the hosting industry, but why bother? I mean, as an individual podcaster, I can go to Apple, I can do this myself. What's the value in delegated delivery? Yeah,
you can. You can go and do it yourself. It's a lot of faffing about. Whenever you try to log into Apple, there's a little button saying "Remember Me," which never does. You have to sit there and wait until Apple has noticed that you've published a new show or a new episode. You then need to, press the upload buttons and everything else. Much, much easier if all of that is completely taken out of your hands and you just press another button in your podcast hosting platform. So I think that's probably why people are doing it, and it just makes life an awful lot simpler. One would assume that there are similar things going on with NPR and, those sorts of platforms as well to enable them to upload stuff pretty well automatically.
So, quick question. What's in it for the host? Do they get paid by Apple for this? Do they get any revenue from it? Or is it a case of we better be in the game because everyone else is?
I think it's probably we better be in the game because everybody else is. I wouldn't have thought that they'll get paid any money. Okay. But I think it's just an additional service that, that you kind of have to offer if you're a podcast host. And if interestingly enough, when I was looking around earlier to do this, one of the reasons why I tried stuff out with Omni Studio is that they were offering it at the time. I know the CEO pretty well. And so therefore that was something that I was quite keen on giving a go with. But yeah, it's one of those, it's one of those things, isn't it, where if that's the only thing that you care about, and you have a choice of two different podcast hosts, one, I don't know, Megaphone, and the other one being a Blueberry, for example, then you're probably going to plump for the one that is offering that particular service that you want, I guess.
Yeah, it's the technology escalator. Everyone has to provide it, and then it moves down and becomes a default value service. Okay, well, there we go. Apple Delegated Delivery. The marketing team didn't get hold of it, so it stayed in its original name. Good news. Now, moving on. Amazon Podcasts, I should say. you reported at the end of last week that Pushkin had a deal potentially for $10 million with Amazon Music, but strangely, it's no longer. What happened, James?
Yes, this was Ashley Carman's story in Bloomberg, and it was part of her great podcasting market correction story, where she was essentially rounding up quite a lot of the layoffs and the budget constraints that some of the large podcast companies have been going through over the last 3 or 4 months' time. But and one of the things that she managed to find, which is really interesting, is that Amazon were just about to sign a deal with Pushkin Industries, $10 million apparently it was worth, and all of a sudden someone higher up in Amazon turned around and said, actually, no, we've got to make savings. Can you please go back to Pushkin with a much smaller offer, which apparently they've done, and Pushkin haven't taken them up on. So excellent sleuthing by Ashley there. But I think it's another one of those stories of, podcasting not having a particularly excellent time financially at the moment.
Could it be anything to do with the fact that a certain Lex Friedman, who was responsible at Amazon Music for partnerships and strategy, that he left? Could that be anything to do with this at all?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's anything to do with Lex leaving, and it would be good to have him on the show, as I think we might do in a couple of weeks' time.
No, next week, James.
Oh, excellent! Well, there you go. You see, you're more clued up on this than I am. But no, so we'll find out from him. I mean, I think at the end of the day, there's an awful lot of negative news around, but I think it's negative news really around some of the big companies that haven't necessarily had the strongest of business models anyway, who've suddenly been told by investors that no, we want you to stop investing for the future. We want you to be aiming for profitability now. And I think that's really the only change really that's gone on in that particular space.
Yes, as I said, next week Lex will be on the show, so look forward to asking him a little bit about his time at Amazon Music, maybe a little bit about this deal with Pushkin, and also what he's doing with his new consultancy. So yeah. Now,
excellent.
Staying on Amazon very quickly, Audible, which is part of Amazon, has debuted a new podcast, Undercurrents, Tech Tyrants and Us, looking at how tech is affecting our future. I still get confused. Why do they keep still releasing stuff to Audible? I don't get it.
I'm really confused by this as well. And I've got access to Amazon Music's API, which doesn't have any access to Audible as well. So it's a very strange old thing. But essentially, Audible has a lot of original content. Audible isn't a podcast app, but it commissions a lot of original content. And this was one of them from Coda Story. And then you have Amazon Music, which is the place where you get all of your free shows. So I suppose it's really Audible being the paid for thing, where you get your paid for shows, and then Amazon Music where you get your free shows, and they are free and ad free at the moment because Amazon is paying to get rid of the ads in some of the shows for you as well.
Well, I am still an Audible user, so I'll go and listen to it. Are there any restrictions? Is it only available on Audible? There's no RSS with it, is there? So it won't be available anywhere else.
Yeah, no. So it's only available on Audible, and in fact, I mean, if you remember back, one of the big hits of a couple of years ago, West Cork, was originally an Audible exclusive, stayed on Audible for a number of years, and was then opened up after that, so that it was available in RSS through Acast. And you wonder whether or not that's going to be their plan in the future, is to open up some of their catalogue once they've got a plan. But I think it's basically Audible is Amazon's paid for service, in the same way that obviously Apple Podcasts has a paid for service, and Spotify has paid for shows as well, although I don't remember even seeing any. And certainly when I've been asking Spotify's PR company, hey, give us some good news stories about the subscription service, they've not come back to me. So I wonder what the long-term deals are there.
Google, let's have a quick look at them. Not that we'll miss it, but Google Podcast Creator Program has closed. It was run with PRX. CEO Kerry Hoffman of PRX said the program lasted 3 years, 6 cohorts, and achieved 14,000 applications from 120 countries. Before I say goodbye to the Google Podcast Creator Program, what was it?
So it was basically getting a lot of people who are new to podcasts, particularly diverse voices, and training them up to make great shows. And I think did a pretty good job of that. And working together with PRX was a very clever idea from Google's point of view, and was a good splashy way of launching the Google Podcasts app, if you remember, about 3 or so years ago. To be fair, it's more money spent on training the industry up than Apple has done. So I think from that point of view, it was a pretty good thing.
I've reached out to Kerry Hoffman and asked her if she would come on the show to talk about this, but also talk about what PRX is up to, especially as we talked about web monetization last week, which they implemented.
Yeah, and Kerry's great. And I've chatted with Kerry a number of times on panels and things. So it'd be really good if we can get her on. I have to say, you look at some of the stuff, though, that Google Podcasts has been doing over the last year, and they haven't done anything over the last year, have they? This has been nothing that Google Podcasts has done at all. So I think pulling away from the Google Podcast Creator Program is kind of not really a surprise.
Yeah, I mean, it fundamentally what you said, James, the Google Podcast app has had no new feature updates in 2022. A press release announcing Google-branded podcasts forgot the platform existed. A YouTube document... Yeah, great, well done. A YouTube document suggested it might merge with YouTube's podcast strategy. It is still the third biggest podcast app. It was responsible for 2.6% of all podcast plays from Buzzsprout in December. So it still has a place in the market. Come on, James, you're the font of all knowledge. What is Google Podcasts going to do in 2023? Well,
I'm not sure necessarily that Google Podcasts, kind of needs to change. It's a capable podcast app. It clearly, it's being run, as I understand it, by the search team, and so therefore has to fight for engineering resource with the rest of Google Search, and so that must be quite difficult, I would have thought, in terms of getting there. But it's a suggested new app when you get an Android phone, so it does pretty well in terms of that. It sits there and runs podcast and runs podcast search in actual Google Search. I know a lot of people were asking for a specific podcast search tab, but actually just having a podcast appear in Google Search when it's a good search result to give you is pretty important for us. So I think from that point of view, it's a pretty useful service. And of course, it powers all of the smart speakers and things. One would assume that YouTube Music, which is going great guns, one would assume that they will incorporate podcasts into YouTube Music, do it in a slightly better, more creator-friendly manner than Google Podcasts currently works. But that's just a presumption. And, so we'll have to wait and see whether there is anything there. I did, have an off-the-record chat with someone from Google in Los Angeles this time last year, and he said don't expect any changes or new features for this year. So none of that came as a surprise, and I think it's probably a fine app as it is. It's just being left behind a little bit, I think.
Well, I think Google Podcasts is a fundamentally great moonshot project from Google. Well done. And now it's going to be left on the shelf. They have announced, though, one new feature. I say one new feature, it's tangential. Google announced auto transfer from one device to another with their new Android 13. I have no idea. I have never tried Android. But what it means is you can start on one device and hand over to another. So you can go from your phone to Google Voice speaker to maybe a TV with Chromecast. It currently works with YouTube, and it says in the press release they're working very closely with Spotify. Doesn't say they're working with Google Podcast apps, though. But yes, new feature for you, James, to try on your phone.
Yes, well, that's on Android 13. It'll need a couple of updates for that to appear. Actually, to be fair to Google, they did make an awful lot of announcements around new Android features and things at CES last week, of which this was one of them. So they were doing, a fair amount of announcements. YouTube Music has had a refresh of its library view that went out to all users the other day. So I think Google is still doing quite a lot of work. I look at both iOS and Android, and I wonder, they're pretty feature complete, these things. It's quite difficult to come up with new ideas in terms of how the whole operating system works. I think one of the things that Google could do if they were, bright or clever is to buy a properly decent podcast app, or potentially fork the Pocket Casts interface or whatever, to actually get a bit more of a feature-rich podcast experience on the platform. But as I say, Google Podcasts, I think, does the job okay. It's just not particularly exciting, is it?
Spotify. It seems it's goodbye to more exclusives, James. They're getting rid of them all. Brené Brown has released the final episodes of Unlocking Us and Dare to Lead. And she won't be renewing the 2-year deal. Are they getting rid of everything over at Spotify?
I don't know whether she is leaving because she has been pushed, or whether it was just the natural end of the 2-year contract that she ran. I know that she did pull her podcasts when the big Joe Rogan controversy was on, one of the many big Joe Rogan controversies. So, I know that she was possibly slightly unhappy. There was a suggestion earlier in the year that the number of books that she had sold had gone down because she was an exclusive on Spotify, and therefore her total audience had gone down. I did try and go and find a source of that. And the only source that I could find was me reporting it in Pod News, which doesn't make it true. So I was wondering quite where that initial conversation came from. It was clearly, a chat over a podcast conference somewhere. But yeah, so Brené Brown has gone. We assume that Joe Rogan's contract is coming up later on in the year. So I would guess probably October we'll find out where Joe Rogan is going to. You're pretty convinced he's off to YouTube, aren't you?
Oh, I think so. I think he's had enough. He's been edited. And I know that we reported in the past that Daniel Ecker said that he really hasn't got that much control over what Joe says, but they have gone earlier this week and edited out his tweets about vaccines and various other things. I fully suspect if YouTube is serious about podcasting, just in the same way that Spotify was trying to get a big splash when they launched, they will get Joe Rogan back, and they will make a big thing around it and bring the audience to YouTube again. Yeah,
that may well happen. And, certainly, Joe Rogan was a big pull for, Spotify. But I think also, obviously Joe Rogan excels in terms of video as well. And that's something that Spotify has never been very, very good at. Somebody did ask on podcastindex.social the other day how many Spotify users actually use the video functionality within Spotify. I've heard Adam Curry talking about how bad the experience is. He, by the way, is going to be back on Joe Rogan this month, which should be interesting. I hope that hasn't gone out already. So we should possibly go and watch the Podfather on that show. But to me, it's an obvious thing that Joe Rogan would be bought by YouTube. But who knows? Maybe Amazon are standing and waiting in the wings, and we'll see what they can do with that.
Now, staying with Spotify, Max Cutler, who is from Spotify, he posted a LinkedIn update saying that if you are a creator or entrepreneur, there's never been a better time for you. He was doing this in light of all the pessimistic industry views around the future of podcasting. He predicts that there will be a desperate M&A activity this year. Okay, interesting. As you said earlier, Google needs a podcast app, as companies with fundamentally bad business models will flirt with going bankrupt. But he also said within that same post, he's very big on video as well. Who's Max Cutler, James?
Well, Max Cutler is basically as close as you can be to the head of podcasting at Spotify. His current title, because, everybody's title seems to change every so often at Spotify, but his current one is VP, Head of Talk, Creator, Content and Partnerships, and founder of Podcast Studios. He basically is Mr. Podcast these days. And yeah, I think, focusing on, he would, of course, mention video because Spotify is mentioning video, and Dawn Ostroff is very keen on video as well. And so that's a thing to his boss. I find it interesting that one of his predictions for this year is that a podcast company will go bust. If you remember, that was one of my predictions as well for this year. I hear one podcast company, which I won't mention because I don't have the lawyers, but I do hear one podcast company that maybe isn't actually paying any of their employees at the moment because they don't have enough money to do that. But unfortunately, all of my attempts to get at least some proof so that I could actually run this as a story, all of those have failed. And there are various things going on that I don't necessarily want to be a nuisance in terms of that particular company. So I think I'm just going to sit and wait for a couple of weeks and then see what happens then.
Grab the popcorn.
But yeah, so interesting to see what Max ends up saying there in terms of potentially some companies going bust. I'm sure that that's going to happen. But also very good to see that he is turning around and saying, there are some pessimistic views out there, but they are not the only views. And there are some pretty positive views out there about where podcasting is still going.
Now, one feature they could do with the video is allow full screen video while you're watching it then. That would be really useful instead of leaving it as a postage stamp in the corner.
Yeah, wouldn't it just? I think you can do that. And I think that there is a way of getting it onto your telly as well. But I've not looked too much into that. And obviously, I don't use Spotify on a day-to-day basis anyway. But it does seem as if it's not a great experience at the moment. And you can't help but think that Spotify's closed garden of you can only have video on your podcast if you host with Anchor is a bit of a mistake as well.
Well, CEO, the Diary of a CEO, they'll be fine. They're on Anchor. I'm quite amazed that he's still on Anchor, actually.
Yeah, it's a massive show for you lot in the UK, isn't it? So, it's clearly, it's one of those things where at least you can actually point at Anchor and go, look, there is a big success. There are some people who turn around and say, Anchor hasn't got any big shows, and partially that might be a plan by Spotify to move the big shows off Anchor onto Megaphone, but the other part of that plan is actually, no, there are big shows that are still on Anchor. So, and the Diary of a CEO being exactly one of those. So, so that's an interesting thing.
Moving on, in people news, just days after Shameless acquisition targets, RSS feed was bought, which I thought was a really interesting story. Its host Laura Mayer has announced as the new executive producer of podcast programming at ABC Audio. Tell me more, James.
Yeah, so this is ABC, as in the American ABC, and Laura Mayer, who will now be a very senior person within podcasting at ABC Audio, which is doing some pretty good things in terms of podcasting there. She joins, of course, from 3 Uncanny 4 productions, which she used to own, possibly still does, who knows, and also Stitcher and Slate. She was Panoply's first employee, so she goes back a bit in terms of her experience, so it's great to see her landing on her feet at the ABC. see. Pod News also had an exclusive yesterday. Paul Riesmandel has joined Signal Hill Insights as the company's Chief Insights Officer. He goes back as well. He was one of the first researchers in podcast advertising. He's been working with Midroll Media, which of course is now Stitcher and SiriusXM. Been working with that company since 2014. He's worked on hundreds of ad effectiveness studies, and it's actually a pretty good job that he's moving to be a third-party podcast researcher, because actually, you know, it's fine getting your numbers from the same people that you're buying from, but it's actually rather better to be a third-party researcher. So good news for him. There's a good job going as well at the moment at Podjobs, podnews.net/jobs, to be country manager of Podimo in Mexico. So if you fancy yourself as being able to run that particular company, then you know, dive in there. There are also jobs at KCRW Santa Monica and the Wall Street Journal. So if you're looking for a job, Pod News has podcasting jobs across the industry and across the world. They're free to post too. Just takes 2 minutes to add a new role at podnews.net/jobs.
The tech stuff on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Pod News newsletter. This is where we do all of the tech talk, Sam.
Indeed, the bit I love most. Now, value for value enabled podcast app Fountain had a major update this week. Congratulations to Oscar. 0.6 was released. It added an activity feed for enhanced discovery, and integration allowed you to reward podcasters directly with a credit card using direct payment into MoonPay. Now, you're an advisor, James, but have you had a look at this version, or what did you do to input to this version even better?
What did I do to input into this version? Not much, to be honest with you. But have I had a look at it? Of course I have, yes. And the activity sort of stream that you get when you open Fountain and you have a look in is really cool. There's a lot of very, very smart stuff. For me, it's full of the shows that Kyrin has been commenting on from the Mere Mortals podcast, as well as others. And it's a really good place to find new shows to go and have a listen to, but also see what people who I know have been commenting on them. So, yeah, it's a really nice piece of work. What they've also done is they've done quite a lot of hard work on the UX as well to make it look a little bit easier to operate. So congratulations to the folks at Fountain there for doing that.
Yeah, one of the things, I mean, apart from the activity feed, I remember talking to Oscar a little while back about it, is the credit card integration, because what it allows you to do is have one-click access to top up your wallet through a fiat currency provider. And I think, you know, that will increase the amount of sats within the ecosystem, allowing people to not just have to earn it on Fountain, but actually can then buy more sats to actually bring into the system and to bring into the ecosystem. So yeah, you know, it's a lovely update. There's a lot under the hood as well. When I had a look at it closely, there's a lot of stuff. So if you haven't got Fountain, go and update today. Yeah,
there's a lot under the hood, as you so rightly say, Sam. And I think one of the things under the hood, if I've understood it correctly, and again, I've not spoken to the folks there about it, is that they've actually shifted where your wallet actually is. So under the hood, your wallet is now being looked after by a company whose primary job is to look after Bitcoin wallets. So that's probably a good thing too. So, you know, so that's all happened there. So it's a pretty big update from all sorts of reasons. So, yeah, worthwhile giving that a go. If you've not played with Fountain yet, go and do that. Fountain.fm. Have a listen to this show and to the Pod News Daily, and hit that boost button, because that's always a good thing.
Sticking with Apple then, iOS 16.3 Beta 2. I won't tell you what the release build is, it doesn't matter. Apple Podcast didn't deliver the updated user agent key, which they introduced in iOS 16 to change the user agent when playing on demand from Apple Cool Media. What are they doing, James? Why aren't they introducing this?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. If one part of Apple say that they have released a specific key for you to be able to correctly identify your podcast host, then why Apple Podcasts, which is another part of Apple, haven't actually implemented that? Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, I would suggest to you that one reason maybe is that some large companies like Libsyn and others basically assume that all Apple Core Media is Apple Podcasts numbers, so they get higher figures, and it would actually damage their numbers if they were to put this code in. That might be an idea, but there again might not be. I mean, why else would they be deliberately holding back? I mean, the other reason why they might be deliberately holding back is that they might be actually rewriting the entire core Apple Podcasts app, and they don't necessarily want to be making any breaking changes to the main app. But I mean, it's 2 lines of code, so I don't really buy that one either. So yeah. Who knows what's going on? But I do know that they get very annoyed when I mention it. So we'll probably won't mention that. And we'll probably move on to the latest update of Slack,
wow.
which is pretty cool. Have you seen what the latest update of Slack does when you upload audio into it?
I haven't seen it. I've read it from Pod News, which tells me that it produces transcripts. So when you upload audio files, so that's quite interesting. I don't know what technology they're using, but there you go.
I've got no idea what technology they're using, but I have to say, I believed the source that I got this information from. So I didn't go and test it myself, but I did think just before we recorded today, I thought I better go onto Slack and just see what it looks like, and it's amazing. So you basically you upload. I uploaded an old version of a podcast, and then you wait about a minute or so, and then all of a sudden the entire transcript appears in your Slack space or room or whatever they're called, and it does a pretty good job at it. So yeah, I was really impressed. If you want free transcripts, that does seem a pretty good way of doing it, because you can highlight the whole thing and just copy and paste.
I might try that later. I have got a copy of Slack that I'm using, so I'm not quite sure why I'd want it in Slack, but there you go. Moving on, Friday nights with Podcasting 2.0 live with Adam and Dave is always a fun thing in my house with a glass of red wine, although I'm doing dry January, so God knows what's going to happen this Friday. But they had a board meeting and they talked about the future of cross apps. Now, this seems to be one of those tags that doesn't seem to be getting much traction, but they did seem to suggest that ActivityPub will be used as the full method of doing this, maybe through OAuth, maybe through the Mastodon API. What was your take on it? And then I'll give you mine, James.
Yeah, so, and I think part of this was my suggestion the previous week. So instead of trying to build an entire ActivityPub stack into your podcast app, which would be lunacy, and which every podcast app developer has gone, my God, I'm not going anywhere near that, you just make your podcast app compliant with the Mastodon API. Now, that doesn't mean that everything has to go through Mastodon, because the Mastodon API is also being used by other services that are talking with ActivityPub. So if you use Pleroma, if you use Acoma, if you use any of these other services, they still have the Mastodon API there. So that's all fine and dandy, and that all works. And so basically, you just in your podcast app log into your Mastodon account or your account on Pleroma or any of those other services, and then your podcast app knows how to talk to it. So that's how you post comments, and that's how you see other comments. And so that's pretty well what's been clarified in the board meeting last week. So that makes life very simple. What it also means, which is quite clever, is it means that Mastodon instances are responsible for moderation because, of course, you're posting under your Mastodon instance. And what it also means is that all of these conversations will also be going on in the Fediverse itself. So if you're scrolling through Mastodon, you will see people commenting to their favorite podcasts. So I think all in all, it's pretty good news in terms of getting cross-app comments up and running. I'm hugely excited about cross-app comments, and I think it's just been so difficult and complicated for anybody to understand how to actually implement them. I think now it's going to be much, much easier because it's just as simple and straightforward as log into your Mastodon account and once, and away you go.
Do you still have to use the social interact tag then to place that first comment so that you get a threaded conversation?
Yes, so the social interact tag, as I understand it, it's basically the foundation of where the conversation will be. So that would typically be when you post, I've just posted a new show, and here it is. And then all of the comments come from that. So yeah, that's my understanding of how that continues to work.
And you also wrote about something that I hadn't heard of called the ThreadCap library, which is a really quick way for app developers to grab all the comments back to display them within their app. What is ThreadCap?
Well, it's another John Spurlock project because, of course, all of the best technical projects in the podcasting ecosystem at the moment are from John Spurlock. And this is essentially a piece of code that he's written, which is compatible with the Mastodon API, which basically goes and has a look at that key message and then pulls all of the comments from that key message so that you can actually see that. And it works on, across the different platforms. So it does a pretty good job, and worthwhile having a look at. I would have thought for your Podfans stuff, because to me it looks as if that all of that stuff would be built for you, I guess.
It is, yeah. And again, going back to what Fountain have done with activity feeds, that in the structure that they built it is a activity pub structure as well. So it's active verb object. And so again, you can push across not just comments, but if you integrate with the Activity Pub client, in this case the Mastodon API, you can push other things as well. So you can start to put about, James has just started listening to this podcast or commented is one thing. So we can start to look at what other things you're doing, not just commenting, but other activity as well that you do within the app that you're using.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good move. And I think the growth of Mastodon has happened at just the right time for this. If we were having this conversation a year or so ago, it would be a very different conversation. But I think the fact that, Mastodon is growing relatively well, means that there are going to be more people that at least understand how to find an account on that if they've not actually got one already. So I think all of that is a good thing.
Now, one of the other things that was announced at the board meeting last Friday was the requirement that podcast value only appears once for a show or episode. That now has been removed as a requirement. You can now have more than one podcast value tag within your RSS feed, so you can support both web monetization, which we talked about last week, and Lightning payments. And you've already implemented it, James. Look at you, hey?
Yes, I've implemented both of these things. So Pod News Daily's RSS feed has a social interact tag in there if you want to comment about any of the stories that you hear, and that'd be wonderful if you did. And the Pod News Daily RSS feed also has both web monetization and Lightning payments in there. So depending on which you want to use, Access or Visa, then you can. No one outside of the UK will get that, will they? But anyway, then you can end up paying however it is that you actually want to. So so I think that's a good thing and a good change to the spec that we have. And talking about things in the spec, of course, we've also got Podping, which is a great way to advertise to podcast apps that you have just published a new episode. And Podcast Guru has released new apps this week on both iOS and Android, which are Podping enabled. So you'll see a new episode the moment it's published, which is a good thing. So congratulations to them for that.
Yeah, and Dave Weiner, who is now a Mastodon aficionado and evangelista, he posted that full RSS feeds for Mastodon instances can now be seen in OpenRSS. So you go to openrss.org/news, and if you put a prefix in front, you will get a full RSS feed now.
Yes, and I don't want to accuse Dave Weiner of talking nonsense, but openrss.org, why would you go to a third-party website to get RSS feeds for a Mastodon account when you can just go to the Mastodon account and type in .rss at the end of the URL and get the RSS feed anyway? Why would you want to use a third party for that? Seems to make no sense to me, but yes, but I don't want to criticise Dave Weiner. Other people have been there and they've not survived.
Don't incur that wrath, no. Let's not do that.
No, indeed, but you know.
Yeah, just in case you do want to go through the Dave Weiner route of getting your full RSS feed, you can do that through openrss.org. Anyway, we'll move on.
Indeed, and if you just want the simple and straightforward way, then just find somebody who you want to follow on Mastodon, edit the URL to end.rss, and hey presto, you've got an RSS feed. And funnily enough, editing URLs like that, if you edit a getalbi page, then you can, to add .png, then all of a sudden you get yourself a very exciting QR code that you can, I don't know, have tattooed onto you or something, so that you can accept Lightning payments through the Albi system.
Oh, is that what you're doing for Podcast Movement? You're having a tattoo?
Oh,
excellent.
Now that's an idea. I mean, when in Vegas, that's not a bad idea. But yes, no, I don't think we'll be doing that.
Have it on a T-shirt just to be safe.
Yes, yes. Oh no, that's
no. I might get it on a T-shirt. That would be hilarious.
Yes, that's
People
not.
take photos of your T-shirt.
That's not a bad idea. I quite like the idea of a little QR code on a T-shirt. I wonder if you can get them embroidered though. Quite possibly. Anyway, let's move on to awards and events. The Signal Award winners have been announced. Weirdly, the winners were announced this week, but the winning ceremony won't happen until January the 23rd. Don't really understand that one. Also don't really understand that the awards aim to, quote, celebrate the world's best podcasts, end quote. But they have a judging academy wholly based in the US, and I didn't see any winners that were based outside of there. So, but still, always nice to see new awards, even if they confuse me a little bit. The UK's Pod Bible magazine has revealed the winners of its 4th annual Pod Bible polls, which we linked to earlier on in the week, and some events to go to. Podfest Expo, which of course is happening in Orlando, in Florida, if you want a little bit of sun. January the 26th. Is where to go. If you missed the new media show recently, episode 525, Chris Krimitsos was on there and he was talking about what they've been planning and everything else. And Todd said, getyourOwn.com. And Rob said, that's right, Todd. So that's all good. Podcast Movement Evolutions happening in early March in Las Vegas. They've announced the 3rd set now of confirmed speakers for the event. And I noticed there are a bunch of excellent speakers in the 3rd set, although not me. So
they're keeping the best till last, James.
Not quite
best till
wondering
last.
whether or not I'm actually speaking. Yeah, that's clearly what they're doing. Radio Days Europe also happening at the end of March in Prague, in Czechia. It's the meeting point for radio, podcasts and audio, which I will be as well. And the podcast show in London returns May the 24th and the 25th, and Sam and I will be there too. There are more events, both paid for and free, at Pod News, virtual events or events in a place with people. If you're organising something, tell the world about it. It's free to be listed. podnews.net/events.
Boostagram
Corner.
on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Oh, it's my favourite time of the week. Yes, it's Boostagram Corner. We've received a bunch of boosts, and the excellent thing about you, Sam, being on the splits is I've noticed you now go and grab all of the boosts so that I don't have to.
Well, I don't know
very
where
good.
they are.
A big boost, I noticed. Yes, a big boost I noticed from Dave Jones. Thanks for the very fair coverage of the value tag developments. Oh dear, was it that bad? Dave, thank you very much for that. And I did mention something about Kyrin, who's organised a Brisbane podcasters meetup for the end of this month, and he'd written 7 a.m. on Facebook, and he's contacted us. He sent us a row of ducks boost, and he said, "Got to get you fit and ready for Las Vegas, James. 7 a.m. drinks followed by 8 a.m. at the casino." It's not how it works in Las Vegas, let me tell you. Anyway, it does appear that it's 7 p.m., which I'm rather looking forward to. And he says, "Sam, gimme some of that Podfans Alpha. You've got news about Podfans, haven't you, coming up a little bit later?"
I have indeed, yes. So Adam Curry sent us a boost as well. How do I put this politely without us getting banned? A row of Richards. Yes, a row of Richards. 11111. He said, crap. Well, that's not us, that was Adam, was sending an anonymous boost, so he's fixed it. Anyway, so thank you for sending us that. And the anonymous boost was... Google click farms in Indonesia. Google may be jacking up their own pages for ad revenue. I think it was about why you're so popular in Indonesia, James.
Oh, that might be it. Yes, yes, and it won't be jacking up their own pages because this is the backstory here, in case you missed it, was Pod News Daily seems to do particularly well in Indonesia, and I couldn't quite work out why. The podcast version of it, so I don't contract with Google in terms of advertising, so it's got nothing to do with that, and Google don't earn any money from the advertising around that. So, I still don't really understand what's going on there. But thank you, Adam, for 2 sets of a basket of Richards. That's very kind of you. And he also sent 5 sevens. There's probably something there. Criticising me for saying that I might change the RSS feed that I give Spotify to have the timestamps in it. He says that's counterproductive to all the work done on the namespace. It's short-sighted and rude. I'm not sure that hacking Spotify to make the product work a little bit better in Spotify is necessarily counter to anything. Yes, I mean, it would be much better, wouldn't it, if Spotify actually used the standards which are available to them elsewhere. So I would certainly agree with that.
And we had a boost from a guy called Gene Bean. Sam, I like Matrix and where it's going. Hit me up on Mastodon if you want any help making sense of it. I know, may well take you up that on Gene. He sent us 1337 sats and he gave us his Mastodon account. So yeah, I might look you up on that because I really don't understand Matrix. Well, I say I don't really understand it. Yes, I do understand it. I just don't understand where it's going to fit into the ecosystem. But I will hit you up on that one. And he sent us another set of sats, 222, the row of ducks, 22222. Gene Bean said, keep up the good work. Thanks, Gene. We'll try.
Indeed. And Brian of London, perhaps I'll be in Melbourne second week of February. I'm in Sydney the first week. Who's allowed you in, Brian? Who's allowed you in? I don't know. But anyway, that's very exciting to hear that. I won't be in Sydney nor in Melbourne during February, but enjoy and I hope you don't get too wet. If you get value from what we do, the Pod News Weekly Review is separate from Pod News. Sam and I share everything from it. We really appreciate your support so we can continue making this show. You can support us with cash, podnews.net/weekly support, or subscribe in Apple Podcasts at apple.co/podnews, or support us with sats by hitting the boost button in your podcast app. And if you don't have one, podnews.net/new podcast apps will help you find a new app like Fountain, for example. What's happening for you this week then, Sam?
Well, I can reveal, I closed the seed round funding for Podland, so I'm very pleased with that. So yes, a nice chunk of money came in for that. So yes, very happy.
Oh, that's very nice. That's very nice. Terms weren't available, or are you able to give us some kind of understanding of how big that seed round might have been?
It was over 300,000, so that was nice. It was enough
very nice.
to get us through probably for the next, let's say 2023 quite happily, without having to go back into the market. We don't have to go and raise a big chunk of money. It's not very expensive to develop the platform. It's more to do with marketing. So yeah, I'm really pleased. It always is hard to raise money, especially in the current market. So yeah, getting any money in is always good news. The other thing I've been looking at is something, another week, another protocol, is the Lightning Service Authentication Token, or LSAT, which is going to be supported by Audible. It's a new standard protocol for authentication and paid APIs, basically a way of allowing people to buy access to goods or services and meter them and limit them based on their usage. It's way over my head right now, I'll be brutally honest, but again, if you want to know more about that, go to lsat.tech. It's got a really good set of documentation, and I'm diving my way through it as best I can.
Wowzers. Well, there's a thing. You've been listening to podcasts as well, haven't you?
Well, only one. No, I say only one. I've been listening to lots of podcasts, but one that has been talked about. It had Jack Dorsey on it. That was the only reason. And if you are interested in Nostr, this other protocol, then he did a massive deep dive on the Bitcoin Review podcast. And it's very, very interesting. It's also very intense. But yeah, if you want to know more about Nostr, then find the Bitcoin Review podcast, episode 18, and you'll pretty much know everything there is to know about Nostr right now.
Very nice.
So James, come on, what's been happening with you?
Well, I was on Discord on one of the podcast servers in there, and somebody was asking whether streaming sats were a waste of time, and I wrote a spirited defense, which I then thought, this is too good as just a quick piece in a Discord server, so I pulled it out of there and I put it onto my personal blog website, which is james.cridland.net, if you want to take a peek at that. But one of the things that I did discover from that is that if you do a comparison between streaming sats and cost per thousand, I can already hear Adam getting upset, getting ready to send us another satchel of Richards. But yes, if you compare streaming sats with a cost per thousand number, then actually streaming sats looks pretty good. If you've got somebody who's paying you 5 sats a minute and they listen to an hour's worth of show, then you're actually earning quite a lot out of that in comparison to what you might be in terms of advertising. So it's a nuance that I think some of the people have missed there. So that was fun to do. And while I was doing that, I went through a lot of my old blog posts, and I discovered that in 2006 I was actually on stage with Adam Curry. Couldn't remember it at all, but apparently I was. The Changing Media Summit of 2006.
Sorry, I'm just thinking no drugs were involved. It was no drugs involved.
I've got absolutely no idea. I can't even tell you where it was. I can't tell you. I can't think of it at all. But the report that I linked to back then was very, very positive. And, I was on stage with Captain Chris Kimber from the BBC, who's still there, and Adam, and I'm not sure that Chris had ever heard of Adam, and frankly, I'm not sure that I had at the time as well. So it was a strange old thing. But yes, that was good fun. But I seem to have said some very polite things to Adam all the way through that. So that was good fun. And one of the other things that I discovered was a blog post from November 2005, which I've also added onto my site, given another lease of life, which was some of the podcasts I was listening to, and I precociously reviewed them all and said whether or not any of them were any good. So the Telegraph podcast, for example, I said was very, very bad. And it was basically, if I remember rightly, it was somebody who couldn't read, reading out articles from the newspaper, and that's what they thought would be a good thing for podcasts at the time. There was something called the Richard Bacon Go Home Show, which I believe was a reheated radio show from XFM that I listened to and liked. The New Scientist podcast, which apparently was very good. I can't remember it at all. Turned out that I was paying for This Week in Tech back in 2005. So that's interesting. And something called the Slashdot Review, which I said was very good. And I don't think it's happening now, and I wonder whether the natural successor to that now is the Tech Meme Ride Home. So I don't know, but so that was interesting seeing. If you want to see any more of that, and I have no idea why you'd want to, but anyway, james.credland.net/blog is where to find that blog, which is the address of it back in 2005. So I've made all of the old links work again. So there's a thing. And of course, the reason why I'm sounding a little bit different today, and the reason why I'm sounding possibly a little bit tired today as well, is that we're actually all on a family holiday, and it's been very nice. And we've been at the top of a mountain here in southeast Queensland, which is 45 minutes drive away from anywhere else, basically, down a very, very wiggly road. I am astonished that the internet has worked so well, and astonished that the mobile phone just works when I walk outside. But yes, I've been on mountain bikes and going down zip wires and all kinds of things. So yes, it's been quite full on, but it's been rather enjoyable. So that's, in case you're wondering why I'm sounding a little bit different, that's why I'm sounding a little bit different.
Kieran from the Mere Mortals will be very happy. I'll have you on that beach run soon, I'm sure.
Yes, I'm sure. And that's it for this week.
You can give us feedback using email to weekly@podnews.net or send us a Boostagram, which we love. If your podcast app doesn't support Boost, then grab a new podcast app from podnews.net/new podcast apps.
Our music is from Studio Dragonfly. Our voiceover is Sheila D. And we're hosted and sponsored by Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy.
Get updated every day. Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show.
And support us.
The Pod News Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.